I'm Carol Becker, Dean of Columbia University School of the Arts. We have several partners in this event tonight, so I just want to thank them all. And it's wonderful when we can work together, and we try really hard to do that as much as we can. So the School of the Arts, of course, then the Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, better known as GSAPP. The Barnard and Columbia College Architecture Department, and the MA in Modern and Contemporary Art, Critical and Curatorial Studies, MODA, and the Department of Art History and Archaeology. So we're really happy to have the partners. So this event tonight is taking place in the context of all the programming that we're doing devoted to the Year of Water. It's a university-wide initiative that spearheaded by the School of the Arts with many, many, many partners around the university. Schools, programs, departments, centers, institutes, partners in the city, all of whom study issues relating to the environment and who direct action that positively affects the planet. These groups have come together to address the urgency of climate change and specifically to issues related to the inequities and the injustices in relationship to water and our global future. So this is one of the Year of Water. This is our third program in the Year of Water series. So I'm going to first introduce our speaker and then Amale Andraos, both of whom are dear friends, and so I'm particularly thrilled to have them tonight. So I'm going to start with Paola. Paola Antonelli is Senior Curator of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art, as well as MoMA's Founding Director of Research and Development. And her goal, and these are her words, is to promote design until its positive influence in the world is universally acknowledged. So hopefully that will come soon, but I hope she keeps promoting design even after that's achieved. I've seen the effects of her work at the World Economic Forum for more than a decade, where she really brilliantly and tirelessly programmed design and art-related events, attempting to demonstrate to the forum how important design is to present and future societies, and how design is everywhere in all aspects of life, visible and invisible, but ever-changing and ever-transforming how humans interact with each other and with the planet. Her work investigates design's impact on everyday experience, often including overlooked objects and practices, and she combines design and architecture and art and science and technology and critical theory, and she's always on the cutting edge of ideas. And she curates and she lectures widely and has taught at Harvard and UCLA. And Paola Antonelli curated, and we're going to hear about this tonight, the 2019 22nd Triennale di Milano, whose thematic was Broken Nature, Design Takes on Human Survival, boldly devoted to the state of human interaction with other species and with the environment. The Triennale was focused on the idea of restorative design, and she now has been working on material ecology, an exhibition on the work of architect Neri Oxman that will open in MoMA in 2020, the new MoMA. She also hosts very exciting and completely original and unexpected research and development salons at MoMA, and these salons take up important social issues that profoundly affect our world daily and will affect it even more in the future. And she is currently also working on a collection of essays on contemporary design, as well as a book about food from all over the world as examples of design, with the terrific title, Design Bites. So we are also really very fortunate tonight to have another really serious thinker about the state of the global world and practitioner of design, and that's Amale Andraos, who will be our interlocutor with Paola after her talk. And Amale is the Dean of Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. I think we're both very pleased that we have now 9 women deans of the major schools of Columbia out of 16 professional schools. It was not always the case. She has taught at several institutions, including Princeton and the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard and the American University in Beirut. And her writing has focused on climate change and its impact on architecture, as well as on the question of representation in the age of global practice. And her recent design studios and seminars have focused on the Arab city, and publications include 49 cities, Above the Pavement, The Farm, exclamation point, The Arab City, Architecture and Representation. And she is co-founder of Work AC with her husband and partner, Dan Wood, and their New York-based practice is engaged with architectural projects that reinvent the relationship between urban and natural environments. And Work AC has achieved international acclaim for projects such as the Edible Schoolyard at PS 216 in Brooklyn, the Kew Gardens Hills Library in Queens, the Stealth Building in New York, the Miami Museum Garage, and a new student center, which looks amazing, for Rhode Island School of Design. So I'm really thrilled to have them both. And first, let's welcome Paola Antonelli.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol, so much. Too. It really is a delight to be here with you tonight, and it's really an honor to be able to not really celebrate, but just commemorate this year of water at Columbia. And it's quite a feat also to be able to talk about an exhibition that's been in the works since 2013. It's really quite fascinating. Ideas are in the air, and when you're a curator of contemporary design or contemporary architecture, you just have to grab them. I like to say that ideas are $1 a pound, is how you realize them. That really makes the difference. And this exhibition began in 2013 with a proposal of exhibition at MoMA that at that time was not accepted, and I can understand that. I mean, in a way, sometimes concepts have to fester, mature, fester, and just become urgent, you know, and sometimes curators think that they're urgent before the rest of the world catches up. So I had this opportunity of waiting for a few years and then having the Triennale ask for an exhibition and being able to propose this. But talking about the year of water, what you're looking at here is the cover of the catalog of Broken Nature that represents this beautiful picture by a photographer from Switzerland. It's a photo of a glacier in Switzerland that is covered with fabric in part to protect it from erosion. What has happened to the world that we have to kind of cover glaciers with blankets to protect them from erosion? And I was just in Italy, where I'm from originally. I was in Milano, and I was hearing that one of the glaciers on the Mont Blanc is diminishing 60 centimeters a week. It's insane that such real devastating events are happening, and we're not all ripping our clothes and running naked in the streets. I mean, some of us are, but not enough. And Broken Nature really comes from this urgency, the urgency to let everybody know that there's a crisis, but also giving some constructive possibilities of, if not completely changing the course of the crisis, at least acting upon it. So Broken Nature, Design Takes on Human Survival is the original title that we gave when we had to decide how to communicate the exhibition and how to title the catalog. You know what? Right now, I'm not sure that I would give it the same subtitle. It would still be Broken Nature, but human survival is less relevant right now than the survival of the whole planet. And that also is a testament to how not only my way of thinking, but also the curatorial team that is with me's way of thinking changed in the process. So I want to talk with you tonight about what this exhibition meant to me and meant to my colleagues, and how it changed my way of thinking, and hopefully also the way of thinking of the audience. Because exhibitions are tools both for curators and for audiences. And personally, I believe that the role of a curator is not to tell people what's good and what's bad, or what's ugly and what's beautiful, what's relevant and what isn't. I think that our role, and my role at least, is to help people develop their own opinions and to help people sharpen their own critical tools. So exhibitions are often not provocations for the sake of provocation, because that's always a little gratuitous, but rather stimuli for people to agree or disagree with, and for people to take home and keep thinking of. So I was telling you about the Triennale. The Triennale building exists since 1933. How many of you have been in it, just so I know? Not too many. Okay. Well, it's quite interesting because I was discussing before with Amale, Andraos. I've been at MoMA for 25 years, and for 25 years I've done exhibitions pretty much only at MoMA. And I always say that I'm so lucky to be there because people come to see Matisse and Picasso, and then they stumble upon my shows, and then they stay there for 2 hours. And so I'm so lucky because I have a much bigger audience, and so on and so forth. And I have to tell you the truth. This building was built in 1933 to host exhibitions of architecture and design in Milano, a city that is interested in design. You know, in Milan, if you talk about football or about design, everybody is going to like have an opinion and say something. You go to the hair salon and you have People and Us magazine and then Domus et Abitare. So it really is very funny. When there's the furniture fair in April, the whole city participates. So here I am in a building devoted to architecture and design, where people come already knowing that they want to see the show. Fewer people, definitely, a third of what I would get at MoMA, but still a very different and interesting reaction and a kind of buzz that goes all over town. So that really is the first important aspect of this exhibition. It was meant for citizens, and citizens responded. And I'll tell you more about that later. What I want to tell you about is something that is very resonant for me. I started my whole career in this building. I grew up in Milano, and I went through many different changes of career, possible careers. But when I was still in architectural school, one of my professors, Cino Zucchi, came in one day and said they're looking for people to install this exhibition at the Triennale. And I was trying to be really cool. I said, oh yeah, how much are they paying? You know, and he said, well, you know, like $10 for 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay. You know, that sounds good. You know, it was important to be at least paid something, right? So that was my first ever curatorial job, semi-curatorial job. I was a gopher, but in this building, and that's how everything started. But the funny thing is that walking back after so many years, I still felt the smell. I mean, I knew the building. It was at the same time super familiar and also completely unfamiliar because I had been for 25 years here, and things work slightly differently in Italy, I can tell you that, but for many different reasons. Anyway, the building that you see here is a fantastic temple to architecture and design. And this is the beginning of the exhibition on the upper floor with the beautiful graphics by Anna Kulacek. Anna Kulacek is a designer that you might know because she did all the graphics for Strelka, and she's based in New York. I mean, she used to be based in Russia, and now she's here in New York, and she did quite a fabulous job. And you can see it here. So when we started, I keep on saying we, and then I'll introduce you in a slide, everybody that worked with me. But when we approached Anna, we started discussing with her the whole concept for the exhibition. There are many key words that helped us along the way. One is the idea of extinction, you know, and how to face our own extinction. So the idea was that we will become extinct. Sooner or later, it's going to happen, right? But we don't have, even though we don't have any kind of control on the fact that it will happen, we have some control on when, a little bit, and we have a lot of control on the how. And if we can design our own elegant extinction, the next species will remember us not as complete morons, but at least, you know, some sympathetic. At least we tried to make something good of ourselves. So that was one of the first concepts. And that's what happens with exhibitions. You start having a few messages that work, and you test them all, and you also test nomenclatures. The second immediate reaction that we had was to deal with the concept of reparations to nature. And in that case, I had a lot of like heated conversation with friends that are African American saying, how dare you use that word for nature? And I said, well, it's really the point. You know, once again, it's a provocation. We have enslaved nature, and we have really stifled it. The way you narrate the plight of African American people, you can also discuss about nature. And so there's been a lot of conversations and debates about that. But once again, the moment you have a word that really sparks controversy and allows you to think, it works quite efficiently. But then, in order to have more latitude and not immediately burn our bridges, we decided to instead move on to the idea of restorative design, and that's the one that stuck. So instead of reparative design, we talked about restorative design. But restorative, thinking of the idea of restaurants. You know, restaurants were born in France in the 18th century as places where you could go and eat very healthy food. To them, bouillon was healthy, so like healthy food, and also at the same time have a convivial experience. So it was about pleasure and also about health. And that was really the idea that most resonated with us, the idea that you can have the kind of great design, elegance, sensuality that we have grown accustomed to when we think of good design, and also be responsible and also have a constructive and positive attitude towards the planet. So this is really what we decided to focus the exhibition on: extinction, reparations, restoration, restorative design, and trying to have in one place many different strategies that citizens can apply in their lives to have a more restorative attitude. And this is the team. I wanted to tell you about the team because, yeah, this is us in the big Triennale stairs. So from left to right, Erica Petrillo, Ala Tanir, yours truly, and Laura Mairan. It was a beautiful team, and together we went through many adventures. We had several public programs, one in New York, two in Milano. We constructed a website. We put together an advisory committee that was like stellar, and you'll hear more about them at the end. And we went through this whole research and this whole path that proved so life-changing for all of us. This is the whole lineup of the collaborators, and in particular the studio folder. They've been spending some time at Columbia University. Some of you might have encountered them. They are Elisa Pasquale and Marco Ferrari. They're fantastic. They designed the exhibition. And then there's, of course, Anna Kulacek and the other curatorial collaborators. So a great, great, great team. And this is, again, I'm going to go back now to the exhibition because I would like to take you through the exhibition a little so I can also narrate to you the whole thinking behind it. So first of all, the Triennale exists since the 1920s. Even though the building was built for it in 1933, it exists since then. And it was a commitment that the Milan government and the Lombardia government made to design and then also to architecture. But it started with design because it was purely commercial and decorative arts fair that also incorporated many different countries from Europe and from all over the world. And ever since the 1930s, the Triennale is part of the International Bureau of Exposition. So it's the same institution that governs, say, Shanghai Expo or Beijing, you know, all the expos all over the world. So it has this very official also attribute, and every time there's a Triennale, there's also international participations, and we'll see more of that later. So this is the entrance to the Triennale building, and these are some views of the whole installation that we'll get more in detail later on. I was telling you that one of the most important aspects was to show the variety of approaches that we can have towards restorative design to an audience made in particular of citizens. And you see here, there are so many if you think about it. If it's about giving back and it's about trying to be more responsible, of course you can recycle, but recycling is just a very small part of what we can do. We can also reduce pollution or harness pollution. You know, there are ways to actually use waste as a new material. So it's not only about reducing waste, but it's also about using waste better. It's about eliminating consumption, of course, or reducing it, but it's also about linking systems. If we start having an attitude that is more responsible towards the environment, we can really pace ourselves. And I know that I'm preaching to the converted here because we all think about it a lot because we are designers and architects and artists. At least we try to have a critical stance towards life, or we should. But in general, sometimes some of these attitudes might be almost surprises. Like one of the old ways of acting in life has become important again, which is what our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers used to do. You know, buying one coat and saving it for a lifetime, for instance, or not wasting anything, whether it's an animal or whether it is instead an object, right? So even repairing is an attitude that is becoming more and more important. Yeah, come on in, no problem. And here is Ala. I just showed you, or not, sorry, I have to go back and show her that I, look here. Yay, there you go. So I just wanted to let you see. So the attitudes, the different approaches that we can have are really very varied, and we were trying to show them in this exhibition. And one of the first commissions to Anna Kulacek was to come up with a series of icons that would show almost like the points of pressure that citizens, designers, artists, scientists can use to actually have a beneficial effect on the world. And they go from talking about extinction to talking about also satellite networks. So all the different points of contact. And then these different icons were used also in the labels for the exhibition. So the exhibition started with one of the commissions, which was Totems by Neri Oxman and the Mediated Matter Group, that showed actually the application of melanin at an architectural scale. I mean, at this point, the architectural scale was only this big because it's such an experimental process that it cost way too much money. But the idea is that melanin, which is the pigment of life in a way, the pigment that protects us from the sunbeams and that is present in so many different creatures across the earth, that this pigment could be harnessed to actually create facades of buildings that naturally get darker and filter more light with the sun that's growing, and also react to temperature and react to proximity. But in the end, it's also a pigment that could be harnessed to make a monument that is almost like a wailing wall that uses the color of the skin as the symbolic filter for meaning. So it is quite a beautiful testament to the fact that when we talk about nature, we don't talk only about animals and plants, but we also talk about other human beings. One of the most important concepts in the exhibition was to make people realize that we are part of nature, which is something that's been mentioned by many scholars and many writers, but that sometimes we forget when we talk about nature as something that is other from us. So this particular initial commission at the entrance of the exhibition reminded people of that. The exhibition started in this very expansive, large-scale way with the pictures, the images of change from NASA. This is a website that is in the public domain. It's completely available to all, that shows the before and after of different parts of the world, before and after either man-made or natural changes, the before and after that can be 3 months period or 100 years. But it shows the mutations and the variations that the planet has gone through. And it shows how change is real and not just imagined. And behind it, another commission, which is the Room of Change by Accurat. Accurat is an Italian company, but it's mostly known as Giorgia Lupi's company. I shouldn't really say that, but it's true. And Giorgia Lupi is a fabulous designer that now has actually signed with Pentagram. So she's based here in New York. She is a visualization designer, but differently from so many other visualization designers, she almost uses her hand to visualize the data. And she is preaching this idea of data humanism that, in a way, could be one of the possible directions in the future to bring also the knowledge, the scientific knowledge of change closer to human beings. So it's a beautiful approach that is represented here in a comprehensive, really gloriously epic visualization of many different changes in the history of humanity from millions of years ago until today, connected to each other and connected sometimes to also cosmic changes and different variations in the universe. So there's a legenda that is quite complex, but people really stayed hours with it and came back. You know, that was also one of the beautiful innovations that the Triennale did for this exhibition. They decided to implement multi-day tickets so people could come back, and back they came, you know, so it was quite wonderful. At the beginning of the exhibition, we also tried to speak about the possible consequences in the future of our choices of today with some beautiful pieces of art and design that spoke about almost like a natural museum in the future. So you see here Plastiglomerate by Kelly Jasbach with great collaborators that stuck with me ever since I saw them for the first time in David Firman Gallery here in New York a few years ago. It's actually, they are pieces of rocks with plastic sediments in them that come from Hawaii. In Hawaii, there's a beach where so much of the debris of plastic waste comes from different parts of the world, and it just like is deposited on the beach. And then the volcanic lava and the volcanic earth sometimes fuse with this plastic to create these fossils that could be plausible in the future. You know, you could find fossils with plastic in it. And similarly, Beyond Drifting by Mandy Barker, that is, she takes very close-up, magnified pictures of plastic waste in the ocean that look almost like fossils or strange animals for the future. And then here is the diva of the whole show. Actually, let me show her with her real sound. This is Mercy, a little female octopus, and it's the work of Aki Inomata. It's quite beautiful. Ammonites were the ancestors of octopi, and they used to be on Earth millions of years ago, and they had a shell. They had a shell that you can still find in fossils, and Aki found one that was like half broken, and then she cast it, and she cast it in acrylic. And then she put it in a vat of water with Mercy. Mercy, after a few minutes, went into her home of 1 million years ago, as if nothing had happened. So there was a natural attraction that the octopus had towards her ancestral home. And it was beautiful to see how this kind of connection resisted over time. And of course, she's also quite fantastic. There she is, Mercy. So there were these sorts of really wide breadth examples of how something never changes and how long scale is important. And that leads us to one of the first goals that we had for the exhibition. As I mentioned to you, it was an exhibition for citizens, and we wanted to have everyone that came to the show leave the show with 3 particular concepts. One, an idea, a feeling of long time. We miss it. You know, sometimes we're able to think in 2 generations ahead of us, but it's hard to think beyond the children of our children of our children. And instead, the exhibition could give a sense of the long length of time that goes generations, and give a sense to people of the fact that we have a responsibility today for what will happen many, many decades from now or centuries from now. The second goal that we had was to give people a sense of the complexity of the systems that we live in. The complexity that is very hard to, of course, master, but it can be approached a little bit at a time. So systems and complexity are hard to tackle, but they can be our friend if we learn to respect them. And the third goal that we had was to have everyone that came to the show leave with a sense of what they could do in their life every day to change their attitude and have a more restorative attitude. So from the long time, we also tried to give a sense of the cosmic variations. I know that next week, or even this week, you're going to have a lecture by Daisy Ginsburg, who's a wonderful designer and a wonderful thinker. In the exhibition, she, together with Christina Agapakis and Cecil Tolas, had Resurrecting the Sublime. They took some plants, extinct flowers, from the Harvard Herbarium and reconstructed their scent by looking at their DNA. And in the exhibition, you had this reconstruction of their natural landscape, digital, and some whiffs of the scent that were reconstructed by Cecil Tolas. Also, we had Alma Music Box, The Melody of a Dying Star, in which the sound of stars colliding light years away, millions of light years away, was captured. You might have heard that it happened in the past few years, that some telescopes that had been scouting the sky for these sounds for decades were able to finally record it. And these records are also played and shown with the variation on a big screen of the stars moving. From there, we went into a section that was about actual restorative design, where we had works such as Mars by Alex Goad, which is an attempt to replenish the coral reef by using these cast ceramic pieces that can be deposited into the sea as trellises. Or also the Nanohana Heels by Sputniko. Sputniko is a Japanese-English designer and artist that often does music videos with the works that she produces. And in this case, she conceived of this high heel platform shoes that have seeds that can be deposited in Fukushima to grow plants that will be able to actually draw the radioactivity from the terrain. Of course, this is very speculative and almost like performative, while instead Mars is being deployed and tested as a real life resolution or possible resolution for coral reefs in Australia. But there was this mixture of art and design, of speculative and real, that we really wanted to achieve in the exhibition. So the first section of the exhibition was very much about speculation, even speculation that could be implemented in reality, like Agua Carioca by Ooze Architects. This being the year of water, I'm sure that you're familiar with the work of Ooze. They do fabulous projects. In this case, it was a project about Rio de Janeiro that showed possible infrastructural solutions at different scales, from the city to the neighborhood to actually the house and the block. And they also did wonderful work last year at ADO, the space in Brooklyn, where there was a long-lasting, a long-term work and lab that was done on water by Jane Withers. So they were part of it. And then, you know, we have here, Khaled is here. Good to see you, Khaled. This is one of the commissions. There were 4 commissions. You've already looked at the one by Neri Oxman and the one by Giorgia Lupi and Accurat, and this is Birdsong by Sigil that was recommended by Ala, who's there, and Ala got me to know Sigil, that is this great collective of architects and artists that are based, well, that are from Lebanon and Syria and that are also based here in New York. Their work is almost like part of a library of works that always connect whatever space they act in, whether it's the biennial in Venice or the triennial in Milan, with Syria. And they try to unearth what happens in Syria by having a connection in the European city or wherever it is, and also a part of the commission and a part of the work happening in Syria. In this particular case, the work focused on birds and the importance of birds in Syrian mythology and in Syrian narrative, and it was connected with work that was happening in the Golan Heights. And it's interesting because the whole Golan Heights affair that was re-heightened last year as Sigil was working on this particular project. The project is very multi-layered and quite beautiful, and I exhort you all to also look at the website, where there's a narration, there's a description that is much more in detail. But the work in itself consisted in this beautiful scarecrow that was installed at the Triennale on a mound of earth that was partly from of course, Europe, but also partly brought in from the Golan Heights. And then a book, so the scarecrow was shrouded in this handwritten shroud and fabric that had an incantation, or like a mystical song or poetry. And then there was a beautiful book that was like shown around the scarecrow that talked about the importance of birds in Syria. So it was really about giving a sense of community and how we think of nature also as community. That was pretty much one of the leitmotif of our installation. And from that, exactly from that particular moment, we moved into everyday life and the sense of community that is so important to really have a restorative attitude. And this room put together this fierce woman, Chiara Vigo from Sardinia, who's the last woman that knows how to do sea silk. I was born in Sardinia, so I'm particularly happy to show her to you. Sea silk comes from a pinna nobilis, which is this big mussel that latches itself to the bottom of the sea using these filaments, and this woman dives and gets the filaments and then weaves the filaments over almost a year, and in the end makes this silk that is very rare and that almost feels like gold. And for us, she made one of the awards. We invented the bee awards. You know, so if Venice has lions, we have bees in Milan. So she made the golden bee that went to the Australian pavilion, actually. So Chiara Vigo and her tradition, then the ama divers in Japan, the women divers that dive for pearls and dive for oysters, and the work by MAP Office based in Hong Kong that followed ama divers and really cataloged the everyday life objects that these women use and did a study that is at the same time anthropological and also design study of their work. And on the right-hand side, Abel Rodriguez, who is from Colombia, and he's a painter that paints by heart all of the plants and the animals from his forest, from the place where he grew up. But the beautiful thing is that he paints also the ones that he never encountered, that his ancestors used to know and that they transmitted orally to his fathers and to the elders of the tribe that actually described them to him. So it's about having a sense of community and a sense of tradition and material culture that travels across time. And from that, from the over time and the everyday, we moved into the mundane and the everyday, because that's what was important for us, to go from the cosmic and the long term to the banal and the everyday. And you see here some examples of work that is other than banal, of course, but that is part of everyday life. From clothes that protect you from the sun without using creams that can be instead deposited over the ocean and can impact life in the sea, to robotic natives. You know, we have digital natives, and in the future we might have robotic natives. So how do you incorporate robots in everyday life, and especially in the care of children and babies? And Totomoshle, that is instead a great initiative in Mexico to harness material culture and also to replenish certain types of corn that have been completely depleted or extinct over time. But one of the projects that we are proudest of is the one on the right-hand side here, the heart attack poster. We're proud of it because we made it happen. There's Karthik Dinakar, who's a wonderful scholar at the MIT Media Lab who studies artificial intelligence and language, and he found out through his studies that so many women die of heart attack because doctors are not able to recognize the signs when they go into the ER and describe what happened. Because usually women tend to minimize, either you say men maximize or women minimize their symptoms. And so we decided to make almost like a Heimlich maneuver poster. And we teamed up Karthik with an illustrator, with a woman illustrator. And you see here, the idea is that you could deploy this and distribute this in all the ER centers. And it shows that while men say when they have a heart attack that an elephant is walking on their chest, women might tell you, oh, you know, I've been carrying too much weight, I've been working too much. They might minimize, but in the end, they have a heart attack. So we're very proud of this. And then also, part of the everyday life attitudes, restorative attitudes, were objects like a biodegradable pregnancy test that is at the same time biodegradable and also good for privacy. So it's good for the environment and good for privacy, or the Ruby cup that some of you might be familiar with. So it was this plunge into the everyday that we thought was very important. And part of the everyday was also thinking of death, thinking of how we will end. This is Capsula Mundi that, of course, fascinated a lot of the visitors. And we were saying how it was important for us that citizens left with an idea of what they wanted to do. I was really touched because this Milanese lady, and when I say Milanese lady, I mean perfect shoes, perfect bag, perfect tailleur. So she must have been in her 70s, and she ran to me saying, "Oh my God, I want to be buried in this. Where do I get in touch with them?" It was really quite fascinating because there was really this sense that there was no drama in the beginning and the end of life as an individual and as a species. That's what I think was beautiful and that we achieved. It was this ability to have people talk about beginnings and ends. And at the beginning, the idea of our discussions about extinction was kind of off-putting to many. But in the end, people kind of calmed down about it. Another important matter was the idea of thinking of waste as a new material. And here are two beautiful examples, one by Kosuke Araki, a great Japanese designer who uses grounds of coffee grounds, and also other food waste to make these beautiful cups that are in the end biodegradable but can be used for quite a few times. And instead, Caroline Slotte, that takes discarded dishes, broken dishes of plastic or of ceramics, and transforms the debris into poetic landscapes that can then be sold almost as art or reused. Or Studio Swine. So thinking of waste as a new material is a concept that might seem a no-brainer, but that I hadn't thought of until I spoke with Forma Fantasma, two great designers that I'll show you more of afterwards. And this whole section is around that. Studio Swine, if you don't know them already, are people that you should really bring here to speak with you. They're fabulous designers and also critical thinkers that always deploy their ideas into in different parts of the world and do something beautiful by just thinking of the situation at hand. This is a work that they did for Sao Paulo in Brazil. They created a portable foundry where you could take all sorts of cans and fuse them there and then and make them into stools that would then replenish street life. So you see here some of the stools, and that one in particular had an imprinted palm leaf in it. So materials that come alive again. Kristen Meindertsma used the leftovers of fabrics by Kvadrat. Kvadrat is a company in Denmark that does textiles, that industrial textiles all over the world. And she was asked by them to create a new use for all this debris, and she made this acoustic fur, she calls it. Just these recycled, almost like dreadlocks that then can be deployed in a thicker assembly or in a rarer one and can be acoustically insulating. So really quite wonderful. And then, we moved from there into also new ways of building and constructing. And David is here, and this beautiful series of biowelding and biowelding materials and biowelding examples was very important to us, because also one way of approaching restorative design is to build in a different way, not only to use new materials, but also to build in a different way. And biowelding, the idea that objects can self-assemble and that components can actually be put together without using other materials, was fundamental for us to explore. New ways of building can also be to build with nature. The Mediated Matter Group and Neri Oxman did this silk pavilion that really captured the imagination of so many different people, because it was about studying the behavior of silkworms and then being able to use silkworms as construction workers almost, by giving them not only the conditions to do their work as construction workers, but also giving them better conditions to live and to die. Usually in the silk industry, silkworms are boiled as soon as they make the cocoon, because what they do is just make the cocoon that then can be reused by the silk industry. And instead, in this particular case, they were left to become moths and then die their own death. So it's a beautiful way to think of building in a more copacetic way with nature. And I was telling you about Forma Fantasma. Forma Fantasma was the fourth commission, and it's called Ore Streams. They did this beautiful research on electronic waste. You know that electronic waste is one of the biggest problems on Earth, not only because of how untreatable the problem is, but also because of the toxicity of the materials that are actually derived from e-waste. The toxicity of the materials that then feed this whole hidden industry and hidden economic cycle. So Forma Fantasma are two Italian designers that live in the Netherlands, and they are always able to design with amazing elegance. And you see here these furniture pieces that are almost hyper designed. They're so sleek they could be produced by an Italian company, of course, or a Canadian company, just like with perfection. And they're all made with electronic waste. But the important thing is that these pieces of furniture are just a way to attract attention, because in reality, one of the most important parts of the commission were the series of interviews that Marco and Simone, that Andrea and Simone actually conducted with all of the people that are part of this hidden trade of e-waste. So it's about showing that design can be superficial, beautiful, elegant, form-giving, but also that that form can reveal so much more that we didn't think about or we didn't know about before. So it was very important for us because Forma Fantasma are always about environmental issues, and they always find a way to attract attention and then redirect the attention towards very important matters. Atelier Luma is part of the Lumina Foundation in Arles that you might know about because it is also quite an architectural feat. What the algae platform at the Lumina Foundation is trying to do is an amazing operation. They're trying to teach people in different parts of the world to use the algae at their disposal. And you know, algae are a byproduct of our pollution. There's a proliferation of algae all over the world. To use them to make biomaterials that then can be 3D printed into vessels, into objects that can continue the material tradition of the place. And they already did that in Arles, of course, but they did it also in Istanbul, and they're doing it now in Sardinia. And it's great to see how this could be almost the fab lab of the future. You know, I'm sure that you've heard about the fab labs that we're trying to give 3D printing and to provide new technologies to different parts of the world. This could happen, but instead of synthetic resin, it could use bioplastics, and biomaterials are one of the possible restorative attitudes that we can have in the future. Systems, you know, so we moved slowly from the cosmic to the mundane and everyday, to inserting new materials and new ways of producing into the mundane and the everyday, showing the systems that can come from it, and then we move into systems altogether. This is only one of the many projects in that particular section. It's by Studio Folder, and it's called Italian Limes. It studies how the borders and the boundaries between countries that once upon a time were based in very many different situations on geographic boundaries have shifted when geography has shifted, but the boundary itself hasn't. So it's about glaciers moving, it's about mountains retracting, it's about putting sensors in nature to measure the differences between nature and our way of thinking and our mapping of the world. And the same goes with what forensic architecture and forensic oceanography are doing. They're revealing hidden systems by all means necessary and all means at their disposal. In their great catalog, we chose this particular example because it was very resonant with Italy at that time. It's the Juventa case. It's when forensic oceanography applied all of their tools and their weapons to study this NGO ship that had been accused by the European authorities of collusion with the traffickers. And they proved that it was not true. It was about really showing that the ship had not turned back towards Syria, but instead was looking for another port. It was about a big controversy, and it's about systems once again. So we wanted to show how there are systems of all kinds. Some are systems that are about trade of e-waste. Others are about trade of human beings. But there are systems nonetheless that in some cases are negative and in other cases instead can be harnessed in a positive way. Another great example of systematic thinking is this work by Kate Crawford and Vlad Anjoler, Anatomy of an AI System. I don't know if you're familiar with Kate's work. She's an amazing thinker and an amazing academic. She's down at NYU. She founded the AI Now Institute, and right now she has an exhibition in Milano together with Trevor Piglin that shows how AI is trained, all the different ways in which AI is educated. In this case, together with Vlad Anjoler, she revealed everything that is behind an AI like Alexa in this particular case. So she showed everything, both hardware and software, how it ends and how it begins. It was a way to reveal a skeleton of a really complex infrastructure and system that is usually invisible to us. This is another view of the exhibition that gives you a sense of how things were displayed. And the end of the exhibition moved into this idea of empathy. And empathy was shown not only amongst human beings, but also human beings and other species. Moyashimon Tales of Agriculture is a Japanese anime that talks about this boy that can see and can speak to bacteria and microbes. The idea of the microbiome that has become almost normal in architecture and in design is something that is new to citizens. It's something that is very well known to our grandmothers, perhaps, who thought that we should have breast milk because we should find a way to build the whole armament of bacteria and the microbiome that is so important to us today. But Moyashimon Tales of Agriculture was represented in the exhibition also with several episodes of the comic. And so people could watch the videos and really have a sense of the fact that we're surrounded by so many bacteria that we don't see and that we don't know about. Empathy can happen also with goats, however. I don't know if you're familiar with Thomas Thwaites. He's quite wonderful. At some point a few years ago, he decided to live for 4 days as a goat. He decided to escape his humanity because it was too cumbersome for him, and he built this contraption so that he could really live as a goat for 4 days. And you know what? The goats accepted him. That's the most important thing, So there can be a contact and there can be an empathy, and we can learn a lot. Empathy can happen also with beings that we don't know at all. Mustafa Faruqi, that is based here in Brooklyn, did this beautiful project that talks about an intake facility for angels that is based here in New York. So angels arrive through the Williamsburg Bridge, and then they get redirected to Governor's Island, where there's a whole intake facility where they get, of course, carded, but also they get given a gender, a sex, because, angels have no sex. So it's a whole construction, fantastic construction that is architectural and also filled with empathy and with possibility that I thought was very important to show. And here is Laura Aguilar. This was one of the most moving discoveries of the whole process of preparing Broken Nature. Laura Aguilar was, and I have to say was because unfortunately she died, a Latinx photographer based in Los Angeles. And she was taking pictures of all sorts of people and all sorts of objects, but the most important series for me were her self-portraits in nature. She used to say that she identified with a boulder. We're all good at empathizing with animals, maybe even with plants, but who of us has ever been able to empathize with boulders? And I thought that these self-portraits of her beautiful body next to boulders that looked like her, I thought was really, really moving. And unfortunately, I read about her in the New Yorker in November. I said, I want to reach out to her. She's really quite amazing. And when I finally did, she had just passed away. And that remained with me, because this is really the heights of empathy. And the whole exhibition ended with this work by Patricia Puccini, Sanctuary, Bonobos, and it was this almost corny, you might say, but at the same time irresistible simulacrum of love that is beyond boundaries, beyond age, beyond species, and really closed the show quite beautifully, to the point that I also photographed myself in there when I had to close the exhibition. It was really a very moving work at the very end. On the other side of the bridge were Okinaganode by Julia Lomond, this beautiful contraption that is made using algae, seaweed, that she did many years ago to test how seaweed would work if used as parchment or as leather. And you know, they work pretty well. So there are many designers that are testing all these possibilities. And then Bernie Krause and United Visual Artists Great Animal Orchestra, a fabulous work that I hope we'll be able to bring to New York at some point. It's an immersive experience. Bernie Krause is an audiovisuals expert, and actually a sound expert in Hollywood. He worked on Apocalypse Now, for instance. And when he was doing Apocalypse Now, he realized how much he loved recording the sounds of nature. So he spent the rest of his life recording at high fidelity the sounds of different landscapes in the world. He calls them soundscapes. And he reached such a catalog that he was able to also measure the sounds a few years away from each other and find out by using spectrography and by deploying audiology techniques, also finding out which species had disappeared. So United Visual Artists, that's a visualization and design and art direction studio in London, created this immersive room in which his soundscapes are rendered and in which you can see when different animals come into the whole concert, because really they all have different frequencies. It's quite special and unforgettable. I was telling you also about international participation. Haiti and Poland and Australia and France are here just example, but we had 21. And we also had something called the Nation of Plants, which was an exhibition by Stefano Mancuso that treated plants as if they were a nation of their own with their own constitution. So altogether, it was a great way to condense, which is what I tend to do all the time, to condense many different ideas in one show and to let people unravel the ideas on their own. There was something for everyone, and people recognized themselves in various exhibitions, in various objects, and those objects resonated with them the most. We had a website, which is kind of still ongoing. We're trying to decide what to do, but since parts of Broken Nature will come to MoMA next year, I think that we might be able to continue it. And this is the advisory committee that we had. One of the things that I have learned in my career is that the first thing you do when you tackle a new show is to put together the best advisory committee ever that covers everything that you don't know, which is a lot usually. So from Rania Hosen and Daisy Ginsberg to Mahalo Uchida, who's a great curator in Tokyo at Mirai Kan at the Museum of Technology and Innovation, to Koyo Kuo, we were trying to cover as much as we could of the different disciplines in the different parts of the world. But the truth is, what was important to us is that citizens really got it. It moved us that in the end, the kids that were doing the Fridays for the Future and that were striking from school would use the Triennale, would use Broken Nature as their gathering points. Because truly, the only way to be effective as curators is to make sure that whatever we do has some kind of impact and has some kind of resonance in the real world. And only our visitors can say whether that happens or not. Thank you very much. Yay. Oh, I have my own mic. It's all, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm so well organized.
Yes.
Thank you, Paola. That was just incredible.
Thank you.
I feel like I was there, and I'm very excited to see parts of it at MoMA. But, I think that it was really interesting. You started with this notion that, design is about linking systems and connecting the dots, connecting scales, life cycles, scale across time, across space, making things visible that are not. In a way, design is a mirror of the world, but also of ourselves. Certainly in this exhibition, it seems like it was a kind of self-discovery for anyone who would walk in. And in some ways, it felt to me that this exhibition was about, how does design allow us to reconnect with our own humanity, acknowledge our death, our naturalness, that we are part of nature. And I was thinking about, Western thought, the Enlightenment, right? Reason. Descartes said, je pense, donc je suis, I think, therefore I am, negating the body, and, the mind-body split ensued, or, the battle between culture and nature that people like philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau were battling, or the question of modernity that opposes the representation and reality, and all these binaries we've been stuck with. And in some ways, you're looking at design as a first gesture. Do you make buildings for nature? I thought, the canvas that covers and protects the iceberg, or mercy, so beautiful. And then suddenly you stop making covers for others, and you start thinking, well, maybe we are mercy. We need to find our way back home, it seems. And finding our way back home is, I thought Sigil was so interesting, right? It's kind of a story of both migration and reconnection. But of course, Western thought is very limited, and it wasn't this divide. Native Americans did not have that kind of divide. I mean, there was a sense that you should take care of the land, and you took care of it not just by thinking it's an other, but by burning it in a very kind of protective and productive way. And in some ways, accepting our own limits, and I think here of your incredible calm in delivering this presentation. Once you move beyond the panic of one's own death, you can actually start to be creative. And the Egyptian mummies were amazing, right? It was so much attention to how one dies and with what objects should one die. And it's our arrogance, right? And to think that we're limitless, that allows us to, that forbids us from acting, actually. And I was thinking about Greta Thunberg, who says, how dare you have those fairy tales of growth? She's the adult in the room. And somehow kind of, thinking about this question of scale, because, when you see these objects, you wonder, okay, but what is the impact, right? The scale is so small, but maybe the problem is that we think of scale as bigness, and certainly architects think of scale as bigness. But maybe that's the difference between architecture and design, right? Design is not transforming the built environment; it's first of all transforming ourselves, and you end with empathy. And I agreed with that incredible image of this Laura Aguilar, so touching, right? That she, this kind of sense of complete connection and reconnection. So it was an incredible journey in this show, and I wanted to hear sort of about where you've kind of, you said it yourself, you have a way of converging all these ideas, and how do you see them growing in the world, or how do you see them transforming at MoMA, or what has emerged for you as the how has it transformed your vision? And because you started by saying, I started one place and I ended in another.
Yeah, in many different ways. For instance, one of the first realizations, very important, is to know that we were only one of many exhibitions, of many initiatives by artists, designers, architects that were headed in the same trajectory, in the same direction. For instance, of course, Cooper Hewitt is doing their triennial. It's called Nature. There had just been an exhibition in Lisbon called Eco-Visionaries. There was Pedro Gadagno together with Mariana Pestana. That was about artists thinking of future possibilities for ecology. So, and I could go on forever. And actually, we did. You know, we had a whole section in the website that had other exhibitions. So, very important to know that we're all proceeding in the same direction. There was a beautiful sense of togetherness that happened with this exhibition, and a sense of also of generosity. You know, something big has happened in architecture, as you know very well. You know, it's also about sharing. It's become about not being the original, the first, the ones that would grab everything, but rather in trying to help other people build better, do better, think better. And this is happening in so many different disciplines. So this was a big realization. But another one of my big realization personally came also from working with Ala, for instance, this idea of the importance of interspecies empathy, of interspecies collaboration. And that's why I was saying that right now, I don't know if I would say design takes on human survival, or maybe I would say design takes on human survival, right? Because our survival, which I don't discount, I mean, I would like to live forever, but it should be just taken into account in the whole system. You know, so it shouldn't be the supremacy of humans at all costs, but rather it should be thinking systematically also about that. And that's why thinking of legacy is important. You know, sometimes we do not understand how we should act until it's too late. So, you know, there's that book that just came out that argues, I can't remember what it's called, but it argues that we should have a panicked attitude because that's the only way to really get it together. When you know that you're going to die, you start thinking of your legacy. So let's think that we're going to die so we can think of our legacy and we can backtrack and be more restorative and think in more systemic terms. And when you were talking about scale, sorry, I just wanted to add something to it. In 2008, there was an exhibition called Design and the Elastic Mind that I did. And at that time, together with Adam Blythe, that actually is one of the advisory committee, we started thinking of the need to think of scale in a different way. It's not anymore about size and dimension, but rather it's about complexity and how you can approach it. And that's really, you're so right about design and architecture having this different approach. Design is about the sum of like millions of different acts that change everything. And that's why we used in the catalog the quotes by Bucky Fuller that was called, talking about the trim tabs. So it's a beautiful way of thinking of every single human being as a trim tab. So trim tabs, as you know, are the ones that can move transatlantics, that can move gigantic ships. But if all these human beings, these little trim tabs, move in the same direction, you can really change the course of a planet. And that's how I think design thinks, you know. So the biodegradable pregnancy test and the Rubik cup are important because they might seem like nothing, but if everybody moves in that direction, it can really be powerful.
And it's also, there's kind of shifting how one thinks of, you know, oneself, of scale, but also what are the materials one can use and what are the subjects of, you know, and I wish we could bring more of that at the, you know, at the scale of architecture. It's changing, but it's still kind of very, very difficult to transform. But anyway, I was kind of in anticipation of the MoMA show, I wanted to ask if, there's a lot of interdisciplinarity here. There's incredible freedom and sort of coming together and sort of teams. And is it art? Is it design? Is it architecture? Is it, you know, these boundaries, which, you know, you've erased. You know, part of your kind of legacy is to have questioned these kind of disciplinary boundaries. And I was thinking about how that would come here with also the new MoMA and this notion that it's a much more elastic space, and whether that might have an impact. The building had a real presence in the exhibition with the stair and the smell that you remembered, and, you know, maybe there was a way of staging that show in relation to that past. And
definitely, yeah. And it was easier to mix art and design there. I would have a harder time at MoMA. in a way, you feel, I don't know that I would have been able to show the same kind of art at the Museum of Modern Art, because once again, it's a different context. I felt much more free there. Yeah, that's for sure. But at MoMA, we won't be able to bring the whole exhibition. It would be like reenactments in a way. We will be able to probably show some of the different approaches with small examples. We won't be able to, we'll never have all that space. But I think that really buildings are very important, and the white box is sometimes stifling when you're trying to build a narrative that really captures people. So in that case, the Triennale really worked well. The ascension, the staircase, and all the different spaces, the fact that we could have windows open onto the beautiful park. So also the place where Sigil's work with Birdsong was placed, it was perfect. This round staircase that is normally covered by an art piece that I don't even know why they put it there. Usually you can't see anything, so we opened it up for this particular project, and it was fantastic.
I have one more question, since we have you here at the university is, kind of where education happens, and if Carol and I invited you to, I don't know, launch a program or do something about design, how would you, educate how would you bring all that intelligence to kind of invite the next generation somehow?
Well, what I find very interesting is that many universities are finding themselves locked into these schools that are so separate, and so they build institutes to kind of like bridge all the schools. So probably would be another institute, because I think I know it's the curse, right? But what I think is very important right now is to find a way to be interdisciplinary. It's so important. What designers are great at is at knowing what they don't know and putting teams together. And I'm generalizing like there's no tomorrow, but they have this gift of humility and a little bit of sense of humor. They're like the Meryl Streep of all the visual arts, in the sense that they're never the prettiest.
It's pretty good.
Exactly. They're never the prettiest.
I could
but
be that.
They're never the prettiest, but the most courageous, and they have sense of humor, and they know what they need. It's this amazing capability of building teams and getting the best out of others. So that's what probably I would do. I would just say, okay, let's do interspecies, and work on that.
I think we might have to wait a while for this, but yes, that would be fantastic. I want to turn it over to the audience and make sure you have a chance to. Anyway, it was really fantastic.
Thank you. And there's people here that were in the exhibition. So Khaled is one, David is another. Who else is there? Ala is here. She happily curated the show. So it's nice to see that it's like lived in. And if anybody has any questions or comments, they are more than welcome.
So there are mics. People just have to raise your hand.
Thank you so much. This was absolutely mind-blowing. I just want to know the process in which you discovered some of these projects. Could you walk us through how that came to be?
Well, it really, when I say teamwork, it's not a platitude, it's the truth. I was telling you, Ala and I worked together. She was part of the team since the beginning. I mean, in 2013, I had already compiled, because that's what I do. I just put together all sorts of materials. I bookmark, I pinboard, I just everything possible. And Ala brought some sense to what was already there, and then she added her own. She's very interested, for instance, in interspecies, and she has a knowledge of the world that I don't know, so it was another part of the world. The advisory council also brought in a lot. We had an early meeting with them in which we told them what we had, and we told them what we wanted to have, and they helped us. So it's at the same time receiving and also seeking. And that's my way of curating. So you accumulate a lot, then you start eliminating, and then the ideas get sharpened by what you found. And so it's a biofeedback it's a biofeedback mechanism until you find yourself in the galleries and you start thinking of the real exhibition. And so you start modulating really the path through the exhibition, and it becomes a narrative. So there are some projects that fall, that get eliminated because you have raised the threshold of quality, and there are some others instead that fall by the wayside because they don't work in the narrative, but they're good enough, so maybe you put them in the website. So it really, it has a lot to do with staging, with mise en scène, and it has a lot to do with the message. I hate the word storytelling, but it has to do with storytelling, yeah. Yep.
Hi, Paola.
Hey, Galia.
Amazing lecture. Beautiful. Last week, Olafur Eliasson was here. There's a lot of retombées. There's a lot of back and forth in these themes that you're working in different fields, in art and design. One of the things that lecture and this lecture motivated me to think is that is a museum still the best place to discuss these themes, or are there other institutions that you feel could be engaged in this dialogue?
Oh, mine. I mean, so many. Is the museum the best place? Not necessarily, but it's one of the places. To me, it's about grasping the attention by any means necessary. And I think that there are many different contexts where you can deliver messages. There are, of course, publications, magazines, Instagram. Last night, very fascinating. Sorry, it's almost like a detour, but it works to what you were saying. I was running a salon, one of the MoMA R&D salons, on hair. And there were two people. One was a model and the other one was a founding editor of a magazine called Crown about natural hair for African American women. And we were asking them what happened that in the past 2 or 3 years there's such a heightened interest in African American beauty, style, etc. And they said it was Instagram, and I was like flabbergasted, but it's the truth, So you can curate and you can find a good platform in social media, you can find it in schools, you can find it on the subway, you can find it in museums. So I think that that's the beauty, that we're all doing our bit like trim tabs. And Olafur does it in contexts that are as grand as Tate Modern, and then also as fragmentary as schools or amongst students in different parts of the world. So you really can work on different platforms, but I think that what matters is the attitude and the frame of mind. Museums have to step up if they want to remain relevant, and that's how the whole MoMA R&D idea started, because if museums are only places where you go to contemplate art, and what kind of art, contemplation is important, but it's not all. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
My question is regarding the kind of longevity of the show, and now that it's been taken down and will never again be the same, even though pieces are coming to MoMA, and you mentioned that you want to keep the website up. Do you feel like it's meant to fade away, or do you want to put an infrastructure in place to make sure the pieces stay connected or live on in any way?
No, it's a good question. It's funny because after 25 years of career doing exhibitions, usually when shows are over, I don't miss them at all. Bye, it's gone. I mean, I remember them and I'm proud of them, but emotionally, also there's somebody here. Emotionally, they're gone. This one, I'm kind of sorry that it's gone, but usually I never travel shows because I don't want to be stuck with them for years. This one, I'm kind of sorry that I'm not traveling. But ultimately it'll have to go, because things, you cannot put things in artificial support, in artificial life support, so the website will keep it up for a while, and then we'll see, maybe we'll let it go. There's an Instagram. Ultimately, let's see what happens, but memory sometimes is more powerful than artificial life support. And there's a catalog, Ala. Yeah, thank you. There's a catalog that Electa is not distributing. I don't even know if it's on Amazon. Who knows? No, right? Of course. I mean, working with Italy is wonderful.
Mike, sorry. Hi.
Ah, you're there. Okay, hi.
My question is more about the exhibition design and the mounting of this. Did you try to apply any of the concepts of the exhibition to be materialized in how these was shown?
Well, we used, for the most part, not all of them, but sustainable material, the kind of a paint that cost so much money that was like, you know, super water soluble or whatever. We did our best, you know, and where we couldn't have, everything was non-toxic. The rubber that we put down was recycled. We were not able to be 100% responsible. You know, in some cases it was impossible, also for reasons of cost or for reasons of regulation, but we tried our best. The funny thing is that when you work at the Triennale and in Italy, you know, they give you a very short time to do things. Like, you know, the installation that I would have 3 to 4 weeks to do in New York, we did in 5 days. You know, so everything happens super fast and very well. And some things you can do better than you can do them here, and some others not. We tried to, we had it in mind all the time, but we were not able to be impeccable.
I have one here too. So I'm here now. So
Hi.
I had a question about the balance between pessimism and optimism in the development of the narrative. And if an edited version is coming to MoMA, would that change given how the times have changed, or?
No, you know, it's funny because, you know, when people say that pessimists are pessimists, you know, I think the pessimists are optimists that don't want to be disappointed. You know, that's my attitude. You know, so if I'm a pessimist, I can always be pleasantly surprised. So recognizing the obvious, which is we're going to become extinct, doesn't mean that we have to become depressed. No, there's so much that we can do. Once you know your limits, this is a design attitude, frankly. Limits are very useful. You know, complete freedom is the death of creativity in a way. So I find this kind of realism the spark for incredible imagination. So whenever people say this is pessimistic, I'm like, why? You think you're not going to die? You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay.
Hi, here.
Hi.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much. It's very impressive, and I kind of feel pity that I cannot see it in person. So actually, my question is that, as you have mentioned, that there are many ongoing exhibitions similar in this concept. So my question is that, like, how can you find a new point in the, like, for the exhibition, like, to kind of raise the attention? And also, like, instead of saying, like, having a new concept, like, how do you have a plan in mind to how to turn all this attention to a real action in the public?
Well, first of all, you know, every exhibition has a slightly different angle. And once again, I don't think it's that necessary to be original all the time in concept. You know, that's another old aspiration, you know, that of having like the new idea. Oh, wait a second, maybe you can show me the old idea in a new way. Maybe you can have different words that will touch me and will deliver more. So, for instance, the nature exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt is different from Broken Nature, and it's different for Eco-Visionaries that was mostly speculative, and all the other exhibitions that are going to happen. I think that as we expose the world and audiences and ourselves to these images that are convincing and that go into a particular direction, the more we will obtain results. I mean, already, I always think of the anti-smoking campaign and how effective it was, just delivering the same message over and over, a message that is sometimes delivered in conciliatory tones, other times it's delivered in dramatic tones. So we all give different forms to a similar message, and then in the end we get a result. That's how I feel. So there will be art exhibitions, there will be science exhibitions, there will be design exhibitions, graphic design exhibitions. They will all move in the same direction of awareness, and that will deliver a result.
You're really an optimist, actually.
Yeah, right. She's been trying for ages. Yeah. Come and get your mic. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, because I was going to actually say I thought your show was tremendously optimistic, and this idea of, empowering the viewer to take something away for individual action. And I tend to not be so optimistic. And my question, and it means in a productive way, of where's the place for anger? And I think when I see these children, and I have a teenage son, and the walkouts of the school, and living in a country where we have an entire political party that believes that climate science is belief, not settled science. So individual acts of empowerment are wonderful, but we are operating within a system. And I'm just wondering if there's a place for the productivity of the political impact of anger.
Well, you're talking to the right person, because I like to say that that anger and fear are my friends. Like I'm very angry all the time, but see, I kind of channel the anger into this, So this is my protest. I get the money and the space to mount this, and anger fuels it, right? So you cannot always give anger the shape of anger. So I'm super happy that the students came here to be angry. And I'm super happy that my anger built this. So there's a lot of space for anger. Always. Yes.
I guess within the context of this exhibition and your other work, would you say that there's different forms of art that may have resonated with people differently, more or less, based on their experience within the exhibition?
Many forms of art, or like outside, or in the
forms of art within the exhibition, if there are specific forms of pieces that really kind of spoke to people.
Oh yeah, I mean, there were some absolute bestsellers, between quotes. One was Mercy, the little octopus. The other ones were the bonobos at the end, like really bestsellers. Which ones would you say, Ala, also?
I think people really enjoyed the Ice Stupa as well.
Yeah, Ice Stupa, that's right. Ice Stupa, it was another, that was another big hit. Ice Stupa is something that happens in Nepal, where because of the erosion of the glaciers, people were not able to have in the summertime the amounts of water for irrigation of the fields that they would usually have when the glaciers would persist in the summertime. So they found a way to create these artificial glaciers that then would resist for the whole summertime. So it's true, that was also. Huh?
The reliquaries as well.
Oh, reliquaries also. There was a beautiful cupboard that showed what could become the things that we will not have in the future anymore, like a bat, for instance, or a starfish, and would let people think of what we have today that we will not have in the future. So there were some universal messages, and instead there were others that resonated with people individually, depending on their interest and penchant. And that happens with so many of the contemporary design shows. At least that's the attitude that I take, to try and give something for everyone, so that they will work, something will work. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you.
Hi.
I was particularly interested in the AI exploration of Kate Crawford's work. And if I think beyond, like, decades ahead of these theories of singularity and what technology could cause of, like, upgraded human beings and humanity being in danger and not the superior species anymore on Earth. And in this game of optimism and pessimism, if we are optimistic that this technology will allow us to save Earth from the climate crisis, how do you think, or how do you envision restorative design for this interspecies collaboration? If it happens that we would live with different or upgraded human beings.
Well, you know that's one of the science fiction tropes, the fact that maybe it's better for the whole universe that we do not exist, and so somebody's going to take care of that. So it really is, it's hard to know what's going to happen. I think that we should do the best that we can. That might not save us. Maybe really the best thing for the planet is that we are not, either that we disappear or that we are not anymore the, between quotes, superior species. So I don't know what's going to happen at all. What is great about Kate's work is that, once again, she unveils the human fallibility of so much technology that we think is infallible. I mean, we know very well that AI magnifies and amplifies our own bias and our own mistakes. That's what's happened so far. So how do we correct that? How do we create something that really is better than us? And then if we do, what's going to happen? So we can go on forever speculating, and that's the beauty of Kate's work and the beauty of so many other designers' work. But ultimately, I don't think anybody can really know what's going to happen.
Over here.
Hi.
I really like your metaphor of the trim tab. I think it's...
it's Bucky Fuller's. I wish it were mine.
Oh,
Yeah.
so you can take it. I'll believe it. I've heard that the dinosaurs, and I say the dinosaur extinction, that it wasn't a meteor, and they just sort of died out over time slowly. And I think that
you heard that?
I have heard that it wasn't even if it was a meteor, it wasn't all at one thing. It wasn't a catastrophic event. It was a slow death. For the dinosaurs. And all signs pointing towards sort of the destruction of our own planet slowly over time. I guess my question is, those trim tabs towards non-extinction, those signs that we might not be heading towards extinction, doing this and seeing the design work that you've been seeing, do you see those signals that we're not headed towards extinction anywhere, either through the exhibition or this out there now, or possibly in the future?
No, I don't. I think we're headed towards extinction anyway, because that's the natural course of things. But it's hard for me to measure, to see. I see a lot of beautiful work and good intentions, and that makes me really happy and moved. I am not able to say that steers us away from extinction. I just love to see the effort, and it makes me love human beings. This attempt, it's a heroic attempt, even though it might be completely useless.
Hi.
Maybe we'll take a couple more, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hi.
I appreciate your attitude towards exhibitions as a format that allows for the audience to form their own thoughts. And my question is, where do you find the limit or extent of the delivery or the presentation of the narrative before it becomes too controlling and or suggestive?
Well, to give you an example, we decided not to have sections for this exhibition, right? Very often when you have a big show, there's this tendency of giving sections, titles. We wanted it to be really fluid. One of the big issues that we tend to have when we do exhibitions is that there's a tension very often between the so-called education department and the curators. It happens all the time. There are the label wars. That's another matter. But in general, there's this prejudice and this idea that you need to have a very clear path and indicate to people where they are at all times. Well, I trust, and also the language has to be certain way and the font has to be big. The font has to be big, okay, I understand that. But after that, I think that you really need to have a strong view as a curator, and people are going to get it. So if your choice is not to have sections, and if your choice is for an exhibition to be fluid and for the visitor to float and really move seamlessly from the large scale, the cosmic scale, into the mundane and everyday, people are going to get it. Just like people get movies, even if they have an unusual kind of denouement. You know, you can trust the audience. You can do the best that you can and trust the audience, and they're going to get it. So I think that the limit sometimes is the prejudice of thinking that people need to be given a certain stereotypical path and methodology in an exhibition.
One last. Yeah.
Hi. Not to sound like a broken record, thank you again.
Thank you.
I kind of had, I guess, two questions that I felt maybe fed off of each other. One of the things that I was really interested in is that you started off talking about this idea, not of a provocation, but of stimuli to allow the viewer to come to it. I mean, maybe with their own preconceived notions, but not of a way of attacking them, but a way for allowing possibly conversation or discourse. And I was really interested in that because you mentioned how you had to rethink one of the terms specifically about, I think it was around restoration and thinking of a slightly different term.
It was reparations.
Yes, that's what I meant.
That I needed to mitigate, especially in the United States. Yeah.
Yes, which I think was a really salient point. And I was thinking the first question was, you know, where do you see these conversations continuing? And do you see it maybe possibly when it is retooled for specific sections are retooled for MoMA? Do you see some of these conversations, I guess, continuing or taking on a new form? Because it definitely looks like there's room for more of a debate around that, like in terms of the terms that you use, and also a debate about possibly, because what I didn't see in it a lot was any area where maybe there was like an indigenous source, talking about the way in which indigenous cultures and indigenous environments also take heed of what is happening with the environment. And then I guess the second question was just going to be, how do you trace reception of the entire exhibition?
So to go to the first part, there were some indigenous, you know, there was Abel Rodriguez, there was Colombia, Japan, and then Sardinia, and also some others that you couldn't see in the exhibition, in the slides that I showed. But I think that having conversations is wonderful and important, and I would like to bring also these conversations to MoMA, even though it's going to be a completely different, it's not going to be an exhibition, it's going to be all these snippets, but in a way I will be able to preserve the stimuli, because those don't need more than a few examples to really actually emerge. But conversations are important. It's complicated these days, you know, especially when you use words like reparations. It can be a powder keg, or it can be, if you present it well and with respect, it can be a productive dialogue. I think that, as usual, it's a matter of respect. You know, choosing not to attack, but rather to stimulate, and getting rid of the provocation for the sake of provocation, I think, is one way to show respect and to show that you really want to listen to the other person. There was that, you know, the upshot in the New York Times, the one that actually polls and does. Yesterday, we're talking about having put together 520 some different possible electors, voters. They brought them from all over the United States. They brought them to Texas, all ages, all races, all political creds, and they put them together for 3 days to talk. And even though not many opinions were changed, there was this at least openness and better understanding. This seems trite, but it's so important, you know, just being able to talk. But I can see how there are a few people with whom I could not even mention the word reparation without being shut up, you know. And okay, still we're going to try. I mean, I tried the humble path of saying, hey, you know, I chose it on purpose, but I'll be happy to swallow it back if you tell me that it's the right thing to do. The second part that you asked was, you know, what was the second part?
Reception.
Reception. You don't really measure it. You just, you know, you can feel it. I mean, the Triennale counted how many people went to the exhibition, and they had some data, but we could feel that it went well. We could feel that people were really taking it seriously, and at the same time understanding it and appreciating it. So you feel it.
I agree. I feel it. I feel it too, even though I wasn't there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Paola.
Thank you all.